attention just before we start church, our worship service. Sam has got it up there. One of our hymns this morning is in the bulletin. It's hymn 28. I think it's the children's hymn. I apologize when I went out to Manitoba in June and my daughter asked me to fill in at her church playing, and they sang a couple of new hymns that day that they never heard before, and so we rehearsed them beforehand. And of course, what did I do? I come back here and say, we should do those. And then I promptly forgot that I put them at the end of the month. So I'm going to ask, there's a few of us here that can give it our best shot, and we'll sing the melody through a couple times, and that way when we get to that point in the worship service, we can do our level best, okay, and not disturb the flow. So I'll sing the verse through, and if you want to hum along, that's fine, okay? It is a rather long melody, though. God of the Bible, God in the gospel, hope seen in Jesus, hope yet to come. You are our center, daylight or darkness, freedom or prison, you are our home. Fresh as the morning, sure as the sunrise, God always faithful, you do not change. Fresh as the morning, sure as the sunrise, God always faithful, you do not change. So let's try that first verse, okay? Even if you can just hum it, okay? Here we go, ready, and God of the Bible, God in the gospel, hope seen in Jesus, hope yet to come. You are our center, daylight or darkness, freedom or prison, you are our home. Fresh as the morning, sure as the sun.
everybody that there's gospel in the park tonight. We're singing. Barbecue's at 5 at Heritage Park, and barbecue at 5 and singing at 6, right, or something like that, Bob. Anyway, all welcome. Are there any other announcements? Do we have any celebrations, happy things to celebrate? Oh, we do. Owen, do you want to help me? Sure, that'd be great. Thank you, sir. Let's just get this, okay? Okay, let's go to Susie.
I have very good reason to be celebrating next Sunday. My daughter's coming home with the family. We help Harry. And also, I'm celebrating my 75th birthday that day.
My Aunt Pendra's birthday on Thursday.
Robert Kelly's birthday yesterday.
We are celebrating our Jeff's birthday, and we're happy he's helping it get out some lessons.
This is for my husband's birthday. It was a couple of weeks ago. He was turning 90 years old, and we had 3 birthday parties for him.
That's great.
Good morning. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm a little discombobulated this morning. Probably because I got home from Waterloo about 1:30 this morning. Some of you who were at my wedding might remember my friend Jenny, who sang solo that day. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in February. So she had chemo on Thursday, so I went down and I spent the last couple of days with her. And so I raced home because I'm very happy that I invited my friend Riley to come and speak this morning. And so wanted to be fresh as a daisy, and instead I am discombobulated, so bear with me. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will have the light of life. We know that light is a gift from God, first the Son of creation, then your Son Jesus came into our midst as the light of the world, and the Holy Spirit is present to illumine our work and witness. As we light this candle this morning, may we be ever mindful of your gifts of light and love. Amen. Service over to Riley. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Reverend Riley Tegan. So he's originally from the Huntsville and Barrie area, but for over a decade, Reverend Riley has been a community chaplain in federal corrections at St. Leonard's House, Windsor. He specializes in community parole and reintegration for men who have been serving life sentences of 10 to 50 plus years in prison. Riley runs support groups for the families of offenders, which was recently featured on a CBC radio documentary, The Current, and for 7 years has provided group-based therapy for sexual offenders. He has pastored in 2 separate congregations, serving and advocating for impoverished communities in the Windsor area. I met Riley over 10 years ago, and we sort of lost touch for a while. And then through the wonders of social media, found me again. And so we've kind of started our friendship again, which has been really awesome. So I'm really, really delighted that it's here this morning.
Coming through okay? All right, great. My notes are just up here. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. We'll have a call to worship if you'd like to look in your bulletins, please. And the bold print, I invite you to read together. The music of this faith community fills us with joy and enables our praise to take wing. The friendly conversation we enjoy keeps us in touch and allows us to give and receive support. The word we hear challenges us to act justly while giving us peace in the struggle. The life of Jesus whom we follow roots us in compassion and inspires us to work for the good of our world. Come, let us worship God. Please stand with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, May be seated.
going? Good? Excellent. What is this? I'm going to need one of these this summer. Oh, you have one over there, yeah? Yeah, you need one? You have another one? Oh my, that's a terrible business. You definitely need a Band-Aid for that. Oh, anybody wearing a Band-Aid right now? Who normally gives you a Band-Aid? Oh, your mom. Who's that? Oh, yeah. Right. Excellent. Well, this morning we're going to be talking a little bit about the idea of healing. You listen to my story for a minute. I'm going to tell you a story. And then I'm going to have two things for you to remember. What do you think I'll learn you to do? I'm going to tell you a story. And then I'm going to have two things I want you to try to remember. Okay? You ready? Okay. Here's our story. So, some men ran to Jesus. Your friend Lazarus is very sick. Please come and heal him. Jesus wanted to help Lazarus. But instead of going right away to see Lazarus, Jesus waited. And Jesus told his friends, let's go see Lazarus. Jesus and his friends walked a long way. They finally got to the place where Lazarus lived. Lazarus' sister Martha went out to meet Jesus. Oh, Jesus, she said, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Martha, her sister Mary, and many other people were so sad because Lazarus had died. Many of them were crying. Jesus saw all the sad people, and he started to cry too. Jesus and all the people went to the tomb where they put Lazarus' body. Jesus said, take away the stone. Jesus prayed, and Jesus said, Lazarus, come out of the tomb. Lazarus wasn't dead anymore. He was alive because Jesus raised him from the dead. So the two things that I want you to remember are, well, they didn't really want Lazarus to die. And they asked Jesus to come, but he waited. So sometimes when we want healing, we want it to happen right away. We want that boo-boo to go away right now. We want that Band-Aid to put on it. It doesn't hurt anymore. But it doesn't always work that way. So we have to be patient. So the one thing is that when we get healing, it doesn't always come in the way we expect. The other thing that I want you to remember is that you can help to heal others. And you can do that in lots of ways, by being kind or offering them a Band-Aid when they need one. So, I'm going to give you each a Band-Aid, and I'm going to give you each a picture and a story, and you can take that back to your seat in a moment, just after you start the prayer. I can find it. So let's say it together, okay? I'll say a line, and then you repeat after me. So, dear God, thank you for this day. Thank you for creating everything we see. Thank you for the life we live and for the people in our lives who help us to feel better. Jesus, who helps take all hurts away. Help us to also heal others. In Jesus' name, amen. Great, so here we go. Everybody, we all have a Band-Aid in case you want to share one with someone. Or in case you discover a boo-boo that is not adequately serviced. And then here we go. So and then there's in the activity in the back, there are some crowns and things. So if you go back to your seat, then you can color those pictures beautifully.
Sometimes we say it by rote, and we don't always think about the real meaning. Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
17 to 36. Jesus comforts the sisters. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. But Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. And after she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Why have you laid him? Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Alleluia.
Once again, thank you so much for having me. It is really, really great to be here, and I quickly pick up on how you're such a loving congregation, and there's such a sense of closeness here and family, which is wonderful. Thank you. As was mentioned, I'm a chaplain at St. Leonard's House. St. Leonard's House is a halfway house for men coming out of federal prison who have done 2 to 40 plus years in prison. We currently have one resident who's done roughly about 46 years of his life behind bars. And I have the pleasure of welcoming them to Windsor. One of my favorite things is meeting them at the train station. So they're right out of the institution, and as soon as they get off the train, I'm the first person they see, and I can say, welcome to Windsor. We're glad to have you. I journey with them through the changes in culture. If you imagine over 40 years how much the culture has changed from smartphones and online banking. My favorite thing is taking guys to the movie theaters, because the movie theaters have changed a lot. I journey with them through their struggles with addiction, mental health, their shame oftentimes when men return to the community from prison, they think everyone knows what they've done, like their crime is tattooed on their forehead. And so they're very hyper-vigilant about their surroundings, and oftentimes just afraid of the general public, afraid if they knew how would they be treated. So they struggle a lot with shame and that community reintegration. And I'm also a circle keeper, meaning that I have support circles that I run for the families of offenders, because the families of offenders are often these unseen secondary or tertiary victims of crime. But I was speaking at a local Windsor church about the ministry, and a lady walked up to me after the service and she said, "Riley, that must be hard work working with those people." And without really thinking too carefully about my audience, I said, "Oh, I'll take murderers and drug dealers over church folk any day." They're safer. They're safer. Present company included, of course. She gave me a funny look and an awkward laugh and changed the subject. I also heard people say, it takes a special kind of person to do that work, Riley. And I get their sentiment, they're trying to be encouraging, but I'm thinking, you mean like being a Christian? It's like this special kind of person. I think the dirty little secret of working with ex-offenders is, and the general public, is that they're very normal. But we like to, other people, we like to see them as something different than ourselves, because that helps us get away from our own responsibility, even our own darkness. So we say, oh, those are the evil people, those are the bad people. Then it kind of gets us away from the things that we're afraid of in ourselves. But I also think my approach, in part, is due to my own life in early years. My father served time in jail. My stepdad served time in jail. Both my mom and my stepfather went through drug and alcohol, inpatient and outpatient rehabilitation programs. My parents, their friends, our circles, were all people with troubled histories, addictions and crime and trauma. And I was the kid running around AA meetings, eating cake, and I remember listening to all sorts of nice people talk about their feelings. It was a quite pleasant memory. My mom recently recalled one AA meeting where my brother and I fell asleep under her chair until the meeting was over. This morning you heard Psalm 23 read to us. And any time I hear or I read or I contemplate the well-known words of Psalm 23, I think back to those times. And then I think of my life today and how the words and the lines of this ancient Hebrew poem not only tell the story of the Hebrew people, it tells me about my story too. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. Addiction, my friends, is an all-consuming want. Some have called it a hungry ghost that thrives off of wanting more and destroying everything else in the process of fulfilling its appetite. It's a human problem. Sometimes church can kind of be like an addiction, believe it or not. I was recently asked to go to a church and speak on addiction. And so I got up there and said, "You asked me to come and speak on addiction," and assuming that it's other people that deal with this, not us, of course. And I said, "But I think I need to talk about you. See, your church fundamentally operates like a crack house." This is a Mennonite church, a very regal Mennonite church. And I said, "You come every week to get your fix of religion. You don't deal with any of your issues. And then you go home. And then you come back every week to get your fix." And I'm saying church isn't always like that, of course. And it can be a place where we enter into our pain together and love one another through it. But oftentimes religion can operate like an addiction, just to get us away from our pain, like a substance. Then the psalm says, "He makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters." To me, this speaks of trauma. Green pastures and still waters feel alien to those of us wrestling with historical trauma. But the task of the shepherd is not to control or abuse, but to create and nurture space and boundary where safety and flourishing can prevail. As a chaplain, I've met numerous men who've lived through residential schools and Ontario training schools, and the abuse that came with it, just horrific abuse. And now they're institutionalized in the prison system. And they're only just beginning now to talk about it when they feel safe enough. And And they're over 67 years old. And this is the first time they're talking about it. Then the psalmist says, He revives my soul and guides me along right paths for His name's sake. This is about discovering a purpose. For me, discovering chaplaincy and serving men coming out of prison has been a pathway of catharsis and a reviving experience, a healing experience, what Henry Nouwen calls the wounded healer, where our calling, our mission, our purpose is coming from the place that we are wounded. It's no coincidence that I get to serve people that are struggling with mental health and addictions and crime and all that shame and all that kind of stuff, because it's been a part of my history. And then it says the most beautiful line that we know well. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. This is where I want to camp, because that phrase, for you are with me, is what I call the with God life. And has implications for us. This is the central meaning of that shepherd motif that we hear about in Psalm 23. For you are with me. That is the meaning of the shepherd. My family back in those times became well acquainted with the presence of the shepherd, but also with the reality of the shadow of death, the death valley, or perhaps the darkest shadows of the harbingers of death. Cancer or Alzheimer's or depression, divorce, domestic violence, grinding poverty, homelessness, incarceration, victimization, trauma. All our lives, my friends, are lived in the company of both the shepherd and the shadow. And the psalmist is teaching us something that all the scriptures, my friends, point us towards. They show us this with God life. The book of Genesis, the Psalms, the prophets, Jesus, and the early church documents all lean on this motif of shepherd to illuminate God's desire to just be with us. And then for us to learn how to be with each other. Jesus describing and fulfilling Psalm 23 as the true Good Shepherd becomes an invitation. An invitation into this with God life. In John 10, he says, I am the Good Shepherd. And a good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. And then the Apostle John writes, we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. And I hate to break it to you, but this task isn't only for clergy. This is a role offered to us all. Before there were any priests or deacons, there's a guy named Cain who tried to abdicate himself of this responsibility. He said, am I my brother's keeper? But alas, his attempt at a rhetorical misdirection failed. The answer is a wholehearted yes. You are your brother's keeper. Yes, you are your sister's keeper. Yes, you are your community's keeper. Yes, you are your friend's keeper. We are all connected. And if we celebrate and worship the Good Shepherd, we cannot free ourselves from the spiritual calling to be shepherds of one another. My friends, the motif of shepherd is the democratization of spiritual care and the fundamental responsibility of community building. We are all invited into this with God life, and it characterizes itself as a with one another life. So I'd like you to take a moment and turn to somebody nearby and say, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. For some strange reason, I've always wanted to ride a horse through a creek or like a riverbed, stream, and I had that opportunity during my visit to Monument Valley in Utah. Anyone been to Monument Valley in Utah? Oh, yeah, it's so beautiful. Yeah, it is the most incredible place on earth. And it's a beautiful Navajo community in the U.S. Southwest. And I went horseback riding in the desert with an old friend and fellow pastor, Brad, along with a 17-year-old Navajo guide. And my horse's name was Abahu. and it became quickly apparent that Abahu was suspicious of me. He took one look at me and my size and thought, this is going to be a long trip. But after a little instruction, we headed out, but Abahu and I were lagging behind. He was going slow, and in the meantime, turning his head and looking up at me, looking me in the eye. It was really creepy, but also very mysterious, and I knew horses were intelligent animals, and clearly this was the case for Abahu. And adding to the embarrassment, as I'm lagging behind, I attempted every kind of cliche and sound effect imaginable to try to get him going. I even did it like that. Nothing was happening. I even said, giddy up. And nothing. So nothing was working. I was starting to get flustered as my friend and my guide were getting further and further ahead. So I made a decision. I started talking to him. I've seen people talk to their horses in movies, so I figured I'd give it a shot. I stroked his mane, and I patted the side of his neck, and I thought about what I would say. What do you say to a horse? Well, so to ease my way in the title of Horse Whisperer, I began with apologizing for my weight and telling him the trip would be over soon. I thought I would compliment him, so I told him how powerful and beautiful he was. And then, in this moment of clarity, I looked up over the landscape, looked down at my horse, and I said, thank you. I told Abahu how grateful I was that I was up there with him, and I thanked him for taking me to this place, and I kid you not, we had a moment. Abahu and I had a moment. It was a sudden, beautiful moment, and I can't explain it. I was talking to a horse. Under the desert sky, surrounded by sand and pillars of rock and ancient Anasazi petroglyphs, we had a moment. And then once I finished speaking, I let out a peaceful sigh, and I was no longer frustrated. And then, no joke, Abahu took off galloping. Very, very fast, to the point I was contemplating jumping off. I felt like I was going to fall off, and like if I jump off, probably like I'm doing a roll, and I'll be okay. As opposed to just like trickling off. So, but I stayed on, and we went riding up and down the sand dunes. It was magical, absolutely magical. And you'd be happy to know we found a creek. And I rode a horse through a creek, and I said, "You shall not pass," for you Lord of the Rings fans out there. My dream of riding a horse through a creek was fulfilled, and Abahu and I were good after that, besides the fact that when we finished, they took off his saddle and this massive beast started rolling in the dirt. I imagine thinking, get these human germs off of me. But I experienced in that moment what has been called the sacrament of the present moment. And the reason I share this story with you is I had to learn how to be with Abahu before I could enjoy his company, and maybe before he could enjoy mine. I clumsily learned how to be present with my horse. See, presence is the key to learning this shepherd with God and with one another life. If we don't understand the concept of presence, we will not know how to be with God and with one another. See, my role in chaplaincy could be described as a ministry of presence. It is a with ministry. It's not a to ministry. But think about that word, presence, for a moment. We are relational creatures. We know the presence of another person. We value when someone is with us. People have a presence about them. Places have a presence to them. I remember once I had the opportunity to take an offender to the grave of his victim. And trust me, there's no chaplaincy manual for what to do when you take an offender to the grave of his victim. And I felt like I blew it at first because I didn't know what to say. Until the tears started to flow, and he started to express the sorrow and the shame and talk to his victim. And then he turned to me and he said, "Thanks for being with me. I don't think I could have done this unless you were with me." Don't underestimate the power of your presence. important to know that in our profound failures, in our feelings of inadequacy, our experiences of shame, in our deepest fears, in our loss, our loneliness, someone meets with us in that place. Not to try to fix us or just tell us what to do, but just be with us. What do people say at a funeral? They say, thank you for being here. The presence of another person can affect us for positive or negative ends. Do you know that somewhere upwards of 80% of men in prison grew up without present fathers? Like 80% lack the presence of a dad. So following John chapter 10, Jesus says he's the Good Shepherd. Jesus' proclamation as the Good Shepherd, and our gospel reading was from chapter 11. We see Jesus now model for us this with one another life and what the presence of the shepherd looks like. So we know it begins with the death of Lazarus, and Jesus goes to see where Lazarus is laid. And then we have the shortest verse of the Bible that we know well, Jesus wept. Here we see an ancient Jewish practice called sitting Shiva. It's practiced by Jews to this very day, that people would go to the home of the grieving and sit with them in silence, sometimes for weeks and weeks, and not say a word. Studying the Torah was forbidden, except Lamentations and Job. And the task was to give the grieving your presence by grieving with them. And here, Jesus takes part in the grief of those around him. He is practicing Shiva. Before he raises Lazarus from the dead, exemplifying his own death and resurrection, he gives them his presence in this most authentic and real and raw and human way. Here we see the tears of God in the shadow of death. Jesus is living out Psalm 23. He's fulfilling and showing us the way of the Good Shepherd. So I'd like to make two brief observations before we close our time together. First, I'd like to ask you, in grief, if like me you've prayed, God, what in the world is going on? Or, God, tell me why. You're not alone. I've wrestled with God with these questions, and I think a common thing in suffering is to feel the silence of God. And you may ask, well, how in the world is that comforting? But what if God is sitting Shiva with us? What if what we interpret as his silence is in fact his presence? That the shepherd is sitting Shiva with us because the shepherd knows we don't need rationalizations or quaint cliches. They will never be good enough to satisfy our pain. But we do need someone to walk with us through the shadow of death. Someone to hold us, contain us, and to lead us beside still waters and restore our soul. We need someone to be with us. And this is the gift offered in Christ. His presence with us dwelt among us. That God wasn't interested in shaking his finger at us. He embraced us. He embraced our humanity and suffered with us. And I'd like to invite you to consider embracing the presence of God in a fresh way, to explore and discover with God life. Second, do you know how to give your presence? How are you sitting Shiva, being a shepherd, with people that God has entrusted to you? You know what? Every person that's in your life is someone that God has entrusted to you. Every person. In one way or another. How this looks will be different, and boundaries are important. It is not about invading people's privacy or controlling one another's choices. It is about learning to be with the Good Shepherd yourself, and secondly, discerning the role that you may play in serving and tending to one another. Silence is okay. Can you learn how to grieve with another person and not try to fix it, to listen to their stories? In our culture, we feel obligated to talk and to fill up space and compete, but we're often horrible at just being with another person. Other times, sharing your relatable experience is a means of connecting with someone who feels alone in his or her own struggles. But when I think of my personal life, I think of one thing that connects me and who taught me this ministry of presence. I was in seminary, and I was going through some stuff at home. We had some family problems, but I was away at school. And I was so broken up about it, but I hadn't cried about it. I hadn't felt anything. I hadn't expressed how I felt. And the dean of students got in touch with me, and he asked me to come and see him, and I sat down in his office, and I told him more of what was going on. And this wise, elderly man, the dean of students, burst out crying after I told him everything that was happening. He just burst out into tears, and I was shocked. And then slowly I could feel myself getting closer to my own pain. But it took my dean of students to sit with me and to feel with me in order to discover what it means to give someone your presence. He gave me his presence in that moment, and I've never forgotten it. I've taken it with me in the chaplaincy. So I encourage you to discover and learn how to give your presence to one another. Thank you for listening. Now we're going to take up this morning's offering. So I'd like to invite you to prepare for that. And your ushers as well, please.
Oh
is just for you. May you rediscover the presence of the Good Shepherd in both light and shadow. And may you respond by giving your presence as shepherds to those precious people that God has entrusted to you. And may you discover the sheep are the treasure and livelihood of the shepherd. May you fear no evil, because through the Spirit, Jesus is with you, and you are with each other. Go in grace and peace.